Welcome, y'all. I am so excited to have everybody here tonight. Um, I'm going to be your host this evening. My name is Corey Mickelson, and I am the Marketing Events Coordinator for Flatiron School. A big part of my job is hosting events like this one right here with monthly theme panels and addressing hot topics within the tech community. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to tonight's amazing lead product management and design instructor, Huli. Go ahead and take it away, Huli.
Hey, it is a pleasure to be here tonight with you guys, y'all. I started out in UX design knowing very little about visual design. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight may seem very primitive and very simple, but it's because that's the secret to visual communication. There's no need to have lots of layers and intricacy and forced perspective and a lot of those things that we think of when we're thinking of fine art when it comes to communicating our ideas visually to engineers and other folks that we're working with. So we're going to be playing tonight with some pretty basic concepts. For those of you who are new or have some anxiety about stepping into this world, you should feel totally comfortable. All you need for tonight is a Sharpie or marker, a couple of pens, prefer pens to pencils because we want you to get used to not erasing and correcting things, to just committing to what you're putting on the page and moving on with your life. The other thing is that if you are more advanced, hopefully this will give you some hacks and some shortcuts and some tips to help you get out of your own way when you're trying to communicate so that you're not overthinking your visual communication and that you can do something with just a couple of quick strokes that you might be spending a lot more time on and still be just as powerful and just as effective in your communication. So what I'm going to do here in a sec is share my screen. Before we begin, I want to let you know this will go until about 7:30 Central Time. So it's about a 90-minute class altogether. If you ever need to take a break, feel free to step away, get a glass of water, do whatever. You're not going to be distracting anyone here because all I can see is your names, which is very sad. And I know you're there, but you won't be distracting anybody by doing anything on camera. So don't worry about that. And if you've got any questions, Corey is going to be the maven of the chat bot. So she's going to jump in and interrupt me if there are any questions that come up that we need to address before we go any further. So if everybody's ready, and I hope you are, because I can't see you holding up your thumbs, we're going to go ahead and start. You can post the questions. I believe Corey will be able to see them in the general chat. Yep.
If there's something you're nervous about or shy about, go ahead and put it in the Q&A. But typically, we like people to ask questions in the general chat. That way, if anybody else can answer it for us, or if if other people want to see it and participate with it, then we can go from there.
Right. They can always add a +1 and say, yep, I'm interested in that too. Okay, great. All right, here we go. Hopefully you've got your pens, your paper, your hydrating beverage of choice. And I am going to share my screen. The first thing you're going to see is beautiful purple landscape. And then the next thing you should be able to see is the slide. Intro to product design. So produce design. We're not designing produce tonight, just so you know, although that may be what you choose to draw. All right. In tonight's lesson, we are going to talk about the following things. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about a simple visual vocabulary that you can build to get started. We are going to show you how to start to put some of those elements together to communicate almost any simple concept. We're also going to give you the opportunity to start building your own personal library. If those of you, if there anyone who has been in UX for a while, you probably are familiar using Figma or Sketch or InVision, Adobe XD, whatever tool you use, about putting together a component library so that you don't have to start from scratch every time you're doing visual communication or wireframing. The principle is the same here with sketching. We want you to have a couple of quick sketches that you can just do without even thinking about it, so that you can communicate rapidly, frequently, and directly. We'll give you the opportunity in this course to practice in real time, which is why I mentioned going ahead and getting that pen and paper. Should you want to use a tablet, some people prefer to work on their illustration and sketching skills that way. You're more than welcome to, but I find it faster and in a way easier to detach from the results, easier to relinquish ownership and move on to the next idea if I can just crumple up a piece of paper and throw it over my shoulder. So we'll be practicing those techniques in real time. And then we'll close by sharing some free resources. There are a lot of free resources out there to get your imagination going in a really low risk way and let you work on your sketching skills just a couple of minutes a day. You do not need to take, semester-long course at an Ivy League university in fine art to be able to learn how to sketch. This is something, it's a muscle that you can build yourself with your imagination and your commitment. And finally, we hope we'll end this evening, this 90 minutes, with you feeling an increased sense of confidence in your ability to communicate visually. So I hope you're ready to start, because we are starting before we are ready. This is one of my favorite quotes, because I do personally tend to analyze and collect lots and lots of information and just put together a whole bunch of data and resources sometimes before I start. And one of the best things I learned about design and about drawing is that sometimes you need to start before you're ready. So that's what we're going to do tonight. Now, the first thing that I want us to draw is a bird. All right. And I want to show you a picture of what I do not want. We do not want this bird. This is too much bird, y'all. Nobody needs this much bird. There's feathers going on, there's trees, there's shading, this is way more information than you need to know it's a bird. Now, we don't necessarily want to go this minimal. This also communicates the bird concept, but we want to be a little more sophisticated as we're sketching. All right. So we're going to see if we can hit that sweet spot with our first exercise tonight, and start by doing a little warm up. So if everybody's ready, what I need you to do is grab your pen. It can be any color, doesn't matter. Impossible to make a mistake. Impossible to make a mistake. All right. So what I'd like you to do is get your pen and your piece of paper, and I would like you to make a scribble. A scribble can look something like this. Okay. Can look something like this, can look something like this. Does not matter. Impossible to get it wrong. So just scribble something on your page. Make sure your pen works. Get a little scribble action. All right. So everybody should have a scribble or two. Now, the next steps, I'm going to show them to you on all three of these scribbles, but you only have to do it on one on your page. So you're looking at these, you're going, how in the world is this going to communicate the idea of bird? This is a scribble, it's a squiggle, it makes no sense. Well, let me help you. It just needs some accessories. All right. So the next step we're going to draw a very small triangle. Okay. Everybody can do triangle. Does not require an advanced degree. I'm going to draw a small triangle. If you have a scribble like this, you can put it on this end. Maybe you want to put it there. If you've got a scribble like the one on the right, maybe you want to put it just on the outside edge there. Wants to be somewhere on the outside of your scribble, wherever that is. There's no wrong or right place for it, but it just needs to be toward the outside, as you can see. All right. If you've got a third scribble, maybe you got a loopy kind of scribble like this guy, you can put in the middle if you want. But again, it's on the outside, right? It's on the outside of the scribble. Okay. So far, so good. I hope. That's the hard part, Corey, in teaching a design workshop with it to dead silence. You gotta hope. You gotta hope that people are following along. All right.
People are keeping up in the chat for sure, but nobody's asking any
good,
questions
good.
yet. So I think that they're all drawing
Awesome.
birds right now.
All right. Next step to turn this into magnificent avian example is you need an eyeball, right? So let's put an eye next to the triangle. Can be there. If yours is a little more blobby like mine on the right, maybe you put the eye there next to the little beak. If you've got one that's a loop-de-loop, maybe put it there. Right? So now you've got your bird body, you've got some kind of head face indicator, right, with just a triangle and a dot. You can see where the neck is. All right. Last thing we're going to add is, you know, when you were looking at a peace sign, right, and it's got the line and then it's got the two little things next to it, right? Looks almost like a chicken foot. We're going to be adding some chicken feet, y'all. So let's try it. Here's two on the first one. Here's two on the guy in the middle. It looks like he's flying off to do something important. Here's two on this guy at the end. He's doing a little dance. Maybe he's doing his flamingo impression, trying to communicate another personality, another side of his personality. Now, if you were to keep going with this, you could do all kinds of goofy stuff. You could draw a little worm that this guy on the right is picking up out of the ground. You could draw a bird seed. You could draw that there's like a squirrel hanging off of somebody's claws as they bring food home to their little baby birds in the nest. There's all kinds of stuff you could do. The point here is that this is just a silly, goofy exercise to get you to start stretching your visual thinking muscles, right? It demonstrates how little effort can really be required to communicate a whole idea. Once you've done this now, if I said make a squiggle bird, it would take you probably 5 to 10 seconds. And somebody would look at that and go, well, that's a weird looking bird, but it's a bird. They'd be able to tell. The point is that our minds are pattern making machines. They're always looking to make sense of what we're seeing. And so very little drawing is really needed to convey an idea. Your mind is going to fill in the rest. Your user's mind is going to fill in the rest. So I'd like to start with this exercise just to hopefully get you to give yourself some grace and some space about how little it actually takes to communicate powerfully, and that it doesn't require an art degree. It really just requires a pen and a little bit of imagination. All right, so let's talk about what sketching actually is. All right, now that we're warmed up, sketching, especially for design, is the simplest way for you to convey meaning. You want to convey that meaning quickly and efficiently. You want the conversation to be going on about ideas, not necessarily about your brush strokes, or whether you were influenced by Edward Hopper or what have you. You're trying to communicate an idea, and you have probably sketched before, whether you know it or not. Probably now that you're looking at this, you're going, oh, I actually sketch pretty often, like when I'm giving people directions. That's cool way of sketching. And the thing is, it has been going on forever. Sketching is not a new idea. This is not some revolutionary idea, sorry, Flatiron, that we are introducing to you. This is an art technique with a long and established history. And Bill Buxton has a great book. If you are the kind of person who likes to really roll around in resources on this kind of thinking. And he talks about how sketching has been around for centuries. We can see influential people over generations who are using sketching as a means of working through their initial ideas and then getting to something more sophisticated, getting to something greater. And I want to show you an example of that. Anybody know, can you tell Corey in the chat if you know who this artist is? This artist is working a little bit backwards. This is the type of bull
I'm guessing Picasso.
illustration. Yes, yes, that's exactly right. It absolutely is Picasso. And a bull was one of his great motifs that he used in a lot of his pieces of art. And you can see here, if he were so inclined, he had the talent and the discipline to make something very literal, something very representational. But at the same time, if you look at the bottom right, that also communicates the idea of the bull. And if he was just trying to have a quick conversation, that would have done the trick. Those ones in the bottom row would have been plenty to communicate his idea. He wouldn't necessarily have had to spend the hours that it took to develop the images at the top. Another example is in wireframing. And those of you who are in UX, you've probably drawn things like this, right? It just shows you that in a couple of seconds, you can come up with something in this scrappy sketch that can communicate. You can see that there are 2 buttons on it, right? You can see that there's a place that you could add some text. So it communicates effectively. Now you could go on and put a lot more detail into it. This is the sketch as well, but look at this one. This took a lot longer, right? It's got annotations, it's got cross-hatching, it's got shading, it's got a lot more illustrative elements to it. And it's not necessarily required to communicate the point that we were just working on, which is that we've got a field, you put some copy in it, and then there are 2 buttons. We don't need this whole thing to communicate that. So I share this because it's exquisite. It's certainly something that some of us may aspire to, but it is not required.
We got
for
one
the kind of communication.
question.
Yes, yes.
How
What
do
is
you
the question?
actually get better at coming up with 8 different designs of the same thing in a few minutes?
Yes, yes. After you get better, you do. There's an exercise called Crazy Eights, or it's also called I think 465 or something like that. There are a couple different names for it. And what you'll do is your design manager, for example, may have you fold the piece of paper into 8 squares and give you 1 minute to put a concept on each thing. And the faster you can draw, the faster you can communicate visually, the more ideas you can get out there. And at the beginning of the design process, any of you who have worked on this know that the double diamond or whatever framework you may be using, that you're looking for quantity at the beginning of the design process. You do the pruning later. So the faster you can be at the beginning of this process, the more ideas you can shoot out there to give people to choose from and to take elements from, the more of a contribution you're making to the design process, rather than spending your entire 8 minutes or 16 minutes on one thing like this. It may be beautiful, but it doesn't give your team a lot of raw material to work with. So yeah, you will get faster. So good news, everyone. You don't have to be an artist to sketch. We measure the quality of a sketch based on how effective it is in communicating the idea, not necessarily whether we'd like to frame it and put it on a wall. It doesn't communicate the ideas. Sketches can be terrible and still work great. They do not have to be pretty. So if that's something you're holding on to, no problem. Just take a moment, let that go. The work doesn't need to be pretty. It needs to communicate. All right. So if everybody's ready, we're going to start to rock and roll. So first step is the visual alphabet, and we are going to take a few moments with each of these items to make sure that you've got the hang of it, because you will be using them over and over and over again. We're going to start small. It's going to be okay. And then we're going to get more sophisticated as we go. So those of you who do have degrees in art, you may laugh at these next couple of things, but bear with me. Write it out. Let's keep each other company as we go through this exercise. All right, here's the visual alphabet. That's the whole thing, y'all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Not even as much as the regular alphabet. The visual alphabet. And almost anything you need in a wireframe or in communicating a design or a design concept, you can communicate with some combination of these things. I promise you. And we're going to work and see what that looks like going forward. Okay, but let's practice. Let's practice with the pieces. So get your markers ready, get your paper ready. If you're using Sharpies, they do sometimes tend to bleed. So if you're doing something, if you're on like a really nice surface, like your mom's counter or something, you may want to use a couple of pieces of paper. But this is how we're starting. We are going to have fun. We are just going to loosen up. Nobody else is going to see these but you. It's totally private. There's absolutely no way to make a mistake. There is no risk. Nothing is at stake here. This is just an opportunity for you to be creative and start to loosen up. All right. So the first step, the first item is points. We're going to start with points. So let's make some dots, y'all. And these can be big dots. They can be small dots. They can be like grains of pepper on the paper. They can be a little bit larger than that. Play with the spacing. See what happens if you have a bunch of small dots together and then you start placing them farther apart. You might notice that starts to look like shading, right? That you can use later to create dimension. But points are really valuable in and of themselves, just by their pointness. So let's make a couple of different points, different places on the page. Impossible to do this wrong. Impossible. All right. It feels like some good point action has been happening. So let's raise the stakes a little bit. Next step, we're going to lines, y'all. Now, lines do not need to be perfectly straight. Get used to drawing quick lines. Your squares won't need to be perfect. Your lines don't need to be perfectly straight. Your circles don't need to be perfectly round. The point is, can somebody look at that and tell it's supposed to be a line? Then you did your job. So practice with the pressure of the pen here and see as it gets thicker and narrower, right? What happens when they intersect? What are some interesting things that happen if they cross one another at an angle? Or if you have multiple lines that are parallel to one another, making a pattern. This is something that you can use for shading later as well, if you choose. But for now, let's just worry about the lines. They're more or less straight and they're fast. Okay. lines, lines, lines. Is that a song? I know. I think it was back in the day.
Someone was
Before.
asking, do we draw these separately from the dots?
Yes, if you want, you can use a whole separate piece of paper. Good question. These do not all need to communicate with one another. They're separate letters of the alphabet. Great question. Thank you. All right. You ready to level up? All right.
They wanted, I think this person, they wanted to know, draw on digital device or paper is better. Could you share your opinion?
My personal opinion, and I am not your user, but I prefer paper because if I make something terrible, I like to just be able to the tactile experience of wadding it up and throwing it on the paper is super satisfying to me. So I like that. It also means that I have a sense of the volume when I'm done of what I've created. Whereas if I'm working on a digital device and I'm erasing and starting over, I don't necessarily have that satisfaction of momentum or an obstacle overcome by the time I get to the end of it. But as far as technique goes, there's no one way that's better than the other. It's really just more about how you think as a designer. So paper's my preference. Other people prefer digital solutions, and they're both effective. All right. We're going to go crazy, y'all, now. We're going to start combining elements. What? Yes, you're ready. All right. Next one. Angles. It's two lines connected at a point. Yes. So vary the size. You can make big angles. You can make small little baby angles. You can have them pointing up or down or to the sides of the page or to each other. It could be little alligators coming at each other, whatever you want. But just get a feel for drawing angles quickly. What does that feel like? Maybe it's the point of an arrow. Maybe it's the top of a mountain. Maybe it's the end of a pencil. Think about the angles that you're drawing and get a variety going in there. All right. Good. Now we're going to loosen up a little bit. All right. So feel free to roll your shoulders here. Start thinking curving thoughts, because our next shape, our next element of the visual alphabet is the arc. An arc with a C, not with a K, right? So we just need big or small curves. Don't need to make a full circle. We're just looking at arcs. So you can think of a wave. You can think of the edge of a really good chocolate chip cookie. You can think of, there's a fly on my screen. You can think of the shape of the outside of his wing. He's got a little arc happening. What happens when these arcs intersect? Is there something interesting that starts to happen there? I want to point this out, that there is something that arcs can communicate that we've already seen tonight, and that is a bird. It's just two little arcs there, man, and everybody knows it's a bird, little bird in flight. Super simple. Okay, let's keep those arcs going. Our next shape in the alphabet is spiral. Spirals. So you can vary the tightness of a spiral, right? You can have it be super, super tight, like the side view of the end of a tube of toothpaste. That spiral is super small at the end of that tube. It could be an enormous one, like a carving that you've seen on a church bell or in a grand hall somewhere. It could be something from a seashell. It could be you're a huge fan of the Da Vinci Code and you want to talk about the Fibonacci sequence. Spirals are everywhere. So let's take a minute, draw some spirals of different sizes. Tight ones, loose ones, big ones, small ones. You'll be using them all. All right, now sometimes spirals are what result from arcs. And sometimes there's a different result. Sometimes if an arc keeps going, it actually turns into a loop. So let's practice some loops here. You can make a string of them, like lace on the bottom of a piece of fabric or on the edge of a pillowcase. You can make loops that are just by themselves, just one. No right way, no wrong way. Just make some loopity loops. All right, we're in the home stretch now. So we're going to start making some shapes that combine some of these pieces. If you put two arcs together, yes, you can make a bird. You can make a really primitive bird that communicates the idea of bird. But you can also make eyes or lemons or limes. So let's take a moment here to think about how that feels, to make one arc and then connect it with another one going the other way, right? You can almost see those eyes blinking. And they don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be an identical arc to the one on the bottom. You can change it. Maybe it's not a perfect oval shape with two little points. Dude, that fly is still on my screen. It's good. Okay. Right. Now
Someone asked, do we skip
Yes.
oval and go straight to eye?
Yes. Want you to practice with these little points on the ends. You see where the arcs connect. Great question. All right, the next letter of the alphabet. Now we're going to be getting a little more muscular here, a little more robust. The next letter of the alphabet is triangles. So let's draw some triangles, my friends. They can be long, skinny triangles. They can be pieces of cheese. They can be pieces of pizza. They can be pyramids in the deserts of Egypt. They can be 1, 2, 3, 4, four-sided dice for your Dungeons and Dragons game, all different kinds of triangles. So let's get a couple triangles going. This is a combo of your lines and your angles. You've already demonstrated that you were crushing that activity. So we're moving on to the triangles. All right, next level. Next level, we're going from 3 sides to 4. What? Rectangles. Rectangles, they can be sturdy, they can be skinny and look a little bit fragile, they can look like a bookmark, they can look like a keyboard, they can look like a monitor screen, they can look like a mobile screen, they can look like a mobile keyboard. Rectangles are everywhere in digital design. Big ones may be screens and viewports, small ones may be buttons or taps. Already, you've done the 3-sided item, you've done the 4-sided item. You're now ready for the 5-sided item, house. Let's draw some houses. And notice they don't have to be perfectly symmetrical to communicate the idea of the house. The one here on the right, that roof is a little squirrely. It's a little off center, but that doesn't keep us from understanding it's intended to be a house, that's intended to be a building, or perhaps a really sturdy arrow pointing at something. But in any event, it's not perfectly symmetrical, but it is effective at communicating. And you're doing amazing, sweetie. All right. We've got the last letter of the alphabet coming up. Big finish. And it is clouds. So take a moment, if you would, to draw some clouds. It's putting some arcs together, maybe include some loops where they overlap. The clouds, none of these images are the same, and yet they all communicate the idea that these are clouds, or they're fluff of some kind. Maybe they're marshmallow fluff, maybe they're mashed potatoes, maybe they're ice cream, but there's something soft, right? Now, that is your visual alphabet. That is your first layer of skills for sketching. You've completed that task, and now you have sheets to go back to. If you ever want to warm up for drawing, going through this alphabet is a great way to do it. Going through just drawing circles or loops for 3 minutes can be a great way to loosen up and warm up if you're going to be drawing. But the good news is, now that you've mastered these individual elements, you can start to combine them, right? So we can combine them to create anything. What are we seeing here in this first image? Now, in a different kind of, if I were in my real classroom, this is where people would be shrieking from the back of the room, but I'll trust that you're engaging in the chat. We've got a couple of points, right? For the eyes, we got a quick line for the mouth. We got a super fast circle or a loop for the head. We can tell that's supposed to be a face. There's not wrinkles, there's not eyelashes, there's not eyebrow hairs, there's not a nose, there's not a lot of detail, but it is communicating effectively that that is a face, kind of a serious face, right? Next one, your classic stick figure. Man, we don't know what this person's wearing. We don't know or care about gender or race or, you know, what they do for a living. It's just a person. We've got a body there. And that communicates a super basic idea. This last one, take a look at that, a hand holding a cell phone, but it's super easy. It's a couple of rectangles, right? It's a little circle there on the bottom for the button. It's a couple of ovals or eyes or circles that somebody sat on, if you want to think about it that way. A couple of ovals for the fingers. You don't need to draw fingernails and lines on somebody's knuckles and make sure the wrist is perfectly aligned. Not necessary. All you're communicating is there's a hand holding a cell phone, and that's what's important. That's what your viewer needs to see when they're looking at that image, not Picasso or Da Vinci. They need to see a hand holding a cell phone, and that does the trick. So any questions in the chat, Corey, before we move on to the next section?
Oh, what happened to their fifth finger?
Yeah, okay. So anatomy sometimes takes a backseat to drawing something rapidly. So yeah, I can take that point of criticism. Perhaps one more oval would have been anatomically correct, or perhaps it's just behind the phone. Perhaps they're just holding it like this, like that. I don't know, but fair point. There's only a thumb and three fingers. Okay. Other questions?
Looks like we don't have any other questions at the moment.
All right. Sweet. Let's keep going then. So you've got your alphabet. Now your opportunity is to start to build your component library so that you have these anchors, you have this vocabulary, so that when you want to communicate something, you're not really carefully drawing out one item at a time. You're able to see the whole idea in your head and draw out the whole thing, like this cell phone, right? With the appropriate number of fingers, I hope. If you learn nothing else from me, please learn to include all the fingers. All right, so we are going to play for a while now at adding some components to your library. One thing that you will probably discover that you are called upon to draw a lot, not necessarily in your wireframes, but definitely in your storyboards, in your flow charts. You may need it for your journey maps, for empathy maps you may be working on, different kinds of artifacts. You're going to need different kinds of elements. And one of those that is super common is a person, right? Well, here is a super easy way to communicate the concept a person. Circle, and then just an arc underneath it. Some people choose to draw a line on the bottom of that arc to kind of ground the image and finish it, so that there's the head and there's what looks like maybe it's a head and shoulders photograph, and so there's a bottom boundary there to ground the image. That's certainly an option for you. Other people make a slightly curved line that connects that to add a little bit more of dimension, makes it look a little more like an avatar. So you can try it that way. But if you're trying to communicate the idea of person, this is going to do the job 9 times out of 10. Circle, a little curve underneath it. It's a little bigger, right, to get the idea of shoulders, but you get the concepts here. And once you've mastered this, then you get to start playing with it, right? And seeing what other kinds of things you can do. So here's some examples below. I'm sorry, a couple of these are blurry, but you can see the first one. Oh, there's a pair of people, right? And it's just another couple of arcs right behind it. Next to it, you can see somebody put three little people together and put what looks like a settings wheel in the middle and connected them. So it looks like there's some kind of system together. Next one, you've got a group of three people and it's got some sort of cross. So that looks like it might be medical personnel, right? This one on the bottom is labeled team leader. They've got a person in the circle, and then they've got three rays coming out of the circle. So once you get the concept of a person, you can use it almost infinitely in different kinds of ways, stacking them, layering them, grouping them, but it all starts with the same starting image of the circle for the head and the curve for the body. And it goes from there. So take a moment to carve a couple of those and see which strikes your fancy. I personally lean toward connecting those lines of the arc at the bottom. I like my people to look like they've got two finished components, this full circle and then a slightly larger half circle on the bottom. But as you can see from these images, there are lots of different ways to communicate effectively. So there's your person, right? So far, so good. All right, next image that you can add to your visual library, your component library, is the idea of a file. This is something that comes up a lot in most designers' work, especially if you're working with engineers that are going to build something that you've created out. You may need to indicate that there's a file that needs to be downloaded here. There's a document, there's a place on the flow chart where information needs to be stored. And so you may need to be able to draw something like a file. This is a very simple icon to do it. You've got the triangle in the corner to show there's a page folded down, right? So they can tell, oh, it's not a screen. It's actually a piece of paper is what's being represented here. And then you just draw your line around to connect it. And the little lines in the middle represent text. Doesn't need to be any more sophisticated than that. Those straight lines indicate text. That's all you need. And again, you master an icon like this, then you get to play with it. You can put maybe you want the bottom corner to fold up because that looks better in context of the rest of your design. Maybe you want to indicate that it's a stack of pages or a stack of files, which you can do as you can see here, right? And something that's clever in that second one, you'll notice the way that triangle is drawn. The line of the side of the triangle goes up is the same as the edge of the piece of paper in the back. Right, so it's all connected. It feels solid. It's using that Gestalt principle of proximity and of closure. You can also communicate the idea of a file, the file that the files go in. Again, this is just a rectangle with a little tab at the top, and something as simple as a plus sign lets people know that things can be added, that there's an element of interactivity here. You don't need a long annotation for your developers, right? This plus sign is powerful communication to let them know what they're getting into. So those are the second type of images you can play with. And speaking of images, those are a big part of our work, right, as designers. but we don't always know what the image is going to be because the photo shoot hasn't happened or the art director hasn't come through. The creative team hasn't shared with us what images are approved from the inventory to be using on this project. So sometimes we have to use a placeholder. And this will do the trick, especially for a block level wireframe. You may be tempted. I know it can feel hugely dissatisfying to just be putting a rectangle with an X in your design, but I promise you, it's an effective way of communicating to people early in your design process that there's going to be visual interest here, right? And there are levels of sophistication you can add to this as you become more confident. And just as a designer, you can draw the little mountain range. This is the classic. It's the little mountain range and then the sun or the moon up in the corner. Super easy. 2 angles and a circle. You're done. It doesn't even have to be pretty. I've included this one on the right because it communicates just as effectively, even though the stroke widths are different and the saturation of color is uneven, but you can still tell what it's supposed to be, right? You can still tell, oh, that's an image. That's the 2 mountains with the sun or the moon.
We do have a question in the chat. How would you get a video or animation across?
One way of doing that is a square, or a rectangle, and then you would put a triangle inside it, pointing right.
Sorry, like a play button.
Yeah, exactly like a play button. Exactly like a play button. That'd be a super easy way to communicate. Oh, this is live video. This isn't a static image. This is something that's going to move. Another thing you can do is if you are intending to put a carousel in your design, you can include one image and then put a caret, just that arrowhead on each side of the image. And that's telling the viewer, oh, there are more images where this came from. If this was an actual interactive piece, I'd be swiping on this and it'd be moving. So those are very quick ways in a sketch to communicate without having to try to draw what might be on that particular video screen. You just have the rectangle, and the X is optional, but you could have the X with the little play button arrow on top of it, or just the rectangle with the triangle. And that's going to communicate video. Great question. Yeah, so many sites have video now. That's a good thing to have in your toolbox. All right. So I'm looking at the time. We have time to do this, so I'm super excited. What we're going to do is take this to the next level. This has so far given you the opportunity to kind of put some of these basic loose elements together. So you've kind of got a little box, right, of these little Legos that you can play with now. The question is, how do you begin to assemble these Legos in a way that communicates your larger designs, your idea for the whole web screen or the whole image of the loading page on that app or the onboarding process? How do you start to combine these bits and pieces to communicate effectively to your design partners and to your stakeholders that the project is moving forward before they start sinking a lot of money into it and moving to mid-fidelity and high fidelity? There's so much that can happen at this low fidelity and sketching end of the process that is free and is fast and is cheap. And this is the best place to make as many mistakes as you can because it's not costing you anything. This is the place to try out all your crazy ideas. And yeah, maybe some of them get pruned back, but maybe they spark something else that's amazing that ends up in the final design. So this idea of sketches as a resource for you as a designer to communicate is so hugely powerful. And I think is where a lot of the really exciting work gets done before, it starts to get, all the rough edges start to get smoothed out. This is where the cool stuff happens. And these sketches are a great way to do your formative testing. If you're in UX, this is a great way to do your desirability testing. And you can even do some simple usability testing with this level of sketching before you spend lots of money and come up with color stories and font families and all that good stuff. So let's see how this might show up as we start sketching interfaces, and how can we become more rapid with sketching these interfaces. So we'll talk really quickly before we move into this about just to recenter us. What is an interface? It's the way that people interact with a machine. So it could be something small, it could be something large, could be the remote control that's sitting on your coffee table or your nightstand right now. It could be the touch panel of a microwave, or it could be the dashboard of your car, right? It could be a voice activated device. That's an interface. And it could even be something in code, if that's your jam. But most designers are going to be seeing these things toward the top of the list, either the physical interaction, the choreography, or some kind of voice activated system or voice interaction. So that's what an interface is. And to communicate those interfaces, we often need a visual representation to help people understand it, because it's hard to explain in just words. It's a big part of UX, because I know some people consider it UI and don't consider it UX, and that's a whole other talk show that I will host someday about this whole UX/UI movement. But so much of our work goes into determining what interfaces are needed, what each interface actually needs to do, what's the capacity that interface needs to have, and how users move between them. And if we can start to communicate that visually really effectively, it's going to make our meetings go much more quickly. It is going to improve our relationship with our stakeholders, and it's going to improve our relationship with our partners on the dev floor. So let's look at a couple of different ways that we can communicate this stuff. If you want to just communicate the idea of an interface, you can go pretty simple. If a developer looks at this, they've got an idea that they're looking at a screen that's got a header with a couple of calls to action up there. Maybe one of them is a logo, maybe one of them is a back button, but they can tell that they're looking at a screen. And all that is, y'all, is a rectangle, a couple of lines, and two little buttons. That's it. If you want to make it more complicated, you can. You absolutely can add more lines. If you want to indicate that, oh, there's some interaction here, you might do something like what's on the right and show there's an arrow, and have that starburst to communicate that there's electrical activity, or there's some kind of contact that's happening there. There's an interaction, a physical interaction that's happening there. But for the most part, you can get away with doing something this simple, right? And that's combining the things we learned in the visual library. And this is something you can put, in the visual alphabet. And this is something you can put in your visual library and say, this is my personal way that I draw an interface. If I'm putting it on a flow chart, user flow, or something like that. The other thing that you want to be able to communicate in your designs is the idea of icons and iconography. And as you can see, these particular icons are not very sophisticated, and they're probably not what you would put in your final designs. These are not what's going to make it into your comps that you give to the marketing people. But you get what they are, right? You get that it's an envelope, it's a telephone receiver or an ancient telephone receiver. Maybe some of you are too young to know that this is a telephone receiver, or it's musical notes. You can communicate those icons super quickly. You know how to draw a house now. You could draw that house. Bing, there's your home icon. Took you 1 second to draw that. And you don't have to write out the word home and spend a lot of time making a little perfect house. Just draw that house. There's your home button. Other things you can do in interface design with sketches is communicate these images, right? Maybe you just want to do a placeholder like we talked about before with the X. That's cool. You might also want to include some other elements on there, like you could put a little box with a plus and minus to let the person viewing it know, oh, I can zoom in or zoom out on this picture, but you wouldn't have to write zoomable in an annotation. You just do a plus and minus and a little tiny box. You might do an annotation as well, but it's not necessary. The other thing you might do as an image is if you've got an idea of what's going to be in that image because it's something you've talked about with the design team before, you can go ahead and put a simple sketch in there. You're not going to get in trouble for it, but you don't want to spend too much more time than this. The point is that sketching is rapid, and you wanted to communicate a quick idea. So if you just wanted to, this could be people standing at a meeting, or it could also be people doing jumping jacks. Presumably you've got some context for whatever you're drawing, but there would be the images. Super easy. You want to indicate in your user interface where there's text. You don't have to write out text early on in the process. You can do, as you can see this one at the top, it's centered. Next one, it's a bulleted list. Next one, it's left justify. So you can represent it using thick lines, thin lines. You can use squiggly lines if you want. You can use dotted lines. Any of it is effective in showing people that there's text there. You can save your lorem ipsum until another version. What you're trying to do here is be fast. One other thing to consider including is, do you have some forms? And I include these because they're a mess, but they also demonstrate what needs to be demonstrated here. This form, there's no words in here, but you can tell it's an accordion, right? You've got the down arrow and you can see that this spun out from below that content. You can tell that that's a search bar. Even if you can't really read the word search and the button next to it, you can tell it's a search bar. Same for these radio buttons here over on the right. Little scribble, circle, circle, circle. Oh, I get it. This is choices. Okay. Very, very simple. And you can do this. And the last one I wanted to share is, this one looks a little sharper, a little tidier, but it communicates the idea. And that's a concept of global elements. Like you might have a header or a footer or a left navigation or something that remains constant from page to page. Those are global elements. Your logo would be another one of those. So once you identify the global element, you can use the box just for positioning, and you wouldn't necessarily need to create this over again. If you were to take this, what you're seeing here on the screen, and have a subsequent page, you might just have the little square in the corner with the X, boxes and arrows, and one line instead of 3 little lines, and then the rule going up and down to indicate there's navigation to the side. You wouldn't necessarily have to sketch that over and over again because it's a global element that you've indicated on the front page. Does that make sense? So we've got some global elements, we've got forms, we've got text, we've got a lot of shorthands now that we can use. And I am ready to give you 3 real life pages to sketch out. All right. So this next one, we're going to start simple and we'll get more complicated. All you need to do for these assignments, for these 3 little assignments, is to draw the rectangle of what you see on the screen, the part of the screen that you see represented, and then indicate through some quick sketch, whether it's a little box with a teeny magnifying glass in it, it's a square with a little scribble, lets me know it's a button. As fast as you can, copy these screens as sketches. All right, you ready for the first one? Okay, here's the first one. I'm going to give you 1 minute.
We have one question. How do you learn how to draw straight lines without a ruler?
They don't have to be perfectly straight. I think that is, if I give you no other gift this evening, I would say to forgive yourself if they're not perfectly straight. The other trick that I learned until I got used to being imperfect, which I'm still working on, is I don't know if you can actually see that. You can, yeah, if I hold it up to the screen. This is called a dot journal. And this helps you make straight lines and perfect right angles. And I like it a little better than grid paper because it feels a little more freeing. But you can get, there are lots of notebooks out there. If you say dot grid notebook, you can find a lot of them, and that'll give you practice. The other thing that I do is I move my whole arm. I don't try to draw a straight line just by moving my hand. I move my whole arm, even if it's a small straight line. And for me, that helps me keep it a little straighter. But even so, if I'm, let me grab a piece of paper. If I'm drawing, just, these are some sketches I made the other day of some pens. If I'm drawing a square, it's not going to be perfect, but that'll do the job. That'll do the job. If I want to draw it like that and say, here's the header, and I got a couple of buttons up here, and I got a left navigation, and I got a hero image, and then I got some words over here, and I got a couple of buttons. You know, none of those are perfectly square, as you can see. But if I were walking a colleague through it, they would absolutely be able to follow me. And then if they said, yeah, that looks good, build it out, then I go into a digital solution for me. Then I jump over to Figma, or I jump over to Adobe XD, or whatever the client wanted to be used. And I'd make a more precise one on a digital platform. But as far as the sketching goes, it doesn't need to be straight. Good question. Give yourself freedom to make mistakes. Okay, so here's the first one, y'all. This is the first interface to draw. And seriously, you can start that simple, right? So all you need, look, my corners don't even match up, y'all. It's okay, because you're just trying to communicate the shape. You can communicate, oh, there's a footer here across the bottom. It's got some text in it. Got a little image here of the leaf. I got some stuff going on over here. Looks like there's some kind of avatar. Maybe that's the person up there. Got my little person. There's a little bento box menu happening. Text over there. Big fat search bar in the middle. Throw a magnifying glass at one end. Got a little microphone at the other end. And we got 2 buttons underneath it. And we got the big logo, which you could type if you wanted to, or you could just have a great big squiggle.
We have another
That's it.
question.
Yeah.
For buttons, do you normally write the label or draw a line, and why?
For buttons, it depends how far we are in the fidelity conversation. If it's going to be mid-fidelity sketches, then yeah, I will write it in there. If it's low fidelity, sometimes I just put the first letter and a little scribble next to it, like C for cancel, S for submit, E for enter, and then just put a scribble after it, so that if somebody's looking at it and I'm not there to explain it to them, they can kind of intuit what's in that sketch. But if it's more high fidelity, even mid fidelity, I would probably spell out the whole word. But we're talking here about sketches at the very beginning of the process, to just be throwing out as many ideas as you can. So chances are at that part of the process, I wouldn't spend too much time minding my penmanship. I might just put S for search and a little scribble next to it. But like everything in UX, it depends. So you have a design manager that you work with that is very particular about such things. And in that case, I would work on meeting their standards. Good question. All right, everybody good with the Google? Let's jump to
Can you hold up
next
your
one.
drawing again?
Oh yeah, oh, my terrible drawing, and yet effective. Where is it? There it is. So it's exquisitely bad, y'all, but like it communicates what's on the screen, right? A great big search bar in the middle, a couple of little bits in the header, a couple little bits in the footer, 2 buttons. Highlights are all there. All right, next one's going to be a little more complicated, but you got this. All right.
Okay, one more question.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Do the terms UX, UI imply only in online or digital design, or can these terms be applied to hardware or physical products, more like industrial design?
Oh my goodness, what a great question. I think user experience design or human-centered design can be applied pretty much to any design discipline, whether it's service design, industrial design, landscape design, floral design, anything that is going to involve interacting with a human and helping them to accomplish a task is something that is worth attention by a designer to see if they can make it better. So I'd say all of these principles, they're coming from, because of my perspective in product design and UX design, they're coming from that perspective, but they're solid design principles no matter what discipline or framework you may be using, and absolutely true for service design and industrial design. Absolutely true. Could you read the question back? Did I answer that question? All the parts of it?
Looks like yes.
I got all the parts of it. Okay. Yeah. I mean, design is an extraordinary discipline in that there is so much intellectual rigor behind it. There is so much data and research and thoughtfulness behind it that sometimes people underestimate the contribution that it can make to their product and think it's really just about making things pretty, when it's about making things painless, and it's about making things useful, and it's about making things valuable, and making things that give people hope and comfort and relief and pleasure. Yeah, sorry, that's a soapbox I can hang on for a while, and I know that's not what this class was. So I want to keep going on the sketching part, but thank you for asking that question. Design is just a critically important discipline, I think, in helping humans get through the day. So here's the next one that we can sketch. You can see this is a little more complicated, but not crazy. So we can draw the rectangle, right? What else do we have going on here? We've got, well, let's see, we've got this bar at the top, this dark bar. It's got a little more information. It's got a call to action here in the center, a little arrow, which I might include. Then it's got the header. Okay, that's cool. Here's your logo, your image. Then you got your boop, 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 boop across the top here. Got your little shopping bag here in the corner. And then you got your massive hero image. Communicate that there. We've got a little text, and we got a call to action. So you could draw a little button there. And then below the image, oh, this is interesting. Everybody see this in the bottom left corner of the image? This is a video, y'all. That's a little pause button. So if you wanted to, you could put the pause button there. I would be more likely to put a play button there. I put that little triangle in there, so it was clear that this is a video. And then there's more copy below it.
We have another question. Simple.
Yeah.
How do you show textual hierarchy when drawing?
That is a great question. Here was my attempt in this sketch. This is a lighter line and this is the heavier line to indicate where it says a few of our favorites. So a few of our is in a lighter weight, and then favorites is a single word and it's much larger. So that's one way to communicate that type hierarchy if you're not actually using font choices at this stage in your communications. You can indicate it by line weight. You could also indicate it by you could say, here's a little line of text, and then here's a great big line of text, and make sure it looks very different. This line should be a little bit straighter, sorry. But you can communicate it with the weight and the type of line that you're using to communicate text there. Good question. All right, you ready for the last one? Because this last page is a hot mess. All right, here we go. There's a whole lot going on here, but if you take a look at it, there's a grid underneath it. Look how tidy everything is. That line at the top, where's my cursor? That line at the top is even. You've got this wide column here that's about 2/3, perfectly straight. All the margins between each of those segments below it, totally even. Two images totally aligned with each other. On the third, on the right-hand side, you've got a box, appropriate spacing, box, more spacing, box. So it looks messy, but if you were to draw this out as a sketch, it's actually pretty tidy. And I don't know. I don't know about if I got an engagement ring that has thorns in it, so that if I tried to take it off, it hurt. That would probably cause me to question some things about my relationship, but that's just me. All right, so I don't want to go over, so I'm going to scoot on to this next little bit. What I'd like to do now is do a quick lightning round, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds. No, I'm going to give you 15 seconds because that's even more fun. I'm going to give you 15 seconds for each of these things that I'm about to call out to you. So you will have 15 seconds to draw this icon and communicate it. All right. So 15 seconds. And what I'd like you to sketch is something that communicates the idea of error. Error. Someone has made an error. What might show up on their screen? Okay, next one. Checklist. Checklist. What's an icon that might show up on a screen or a design? And someone looking at that would go, oh, that's a checklist. Good. Next one, image carousel. Image carousel. How might you communicate that in just a few strokes of your pen? Okay. Next one, and this question came up earlier, so thank your classmate for that. Video. How would you communicate that they were looking at something that was video on the screen? Okay, a couple more. Next one, target audience. And if you need to break this into two pieces to do target and then audience, you can do that. How would you communicate the idea of target audience visually? Okay, next clue is deadline. Deadline. You want to indicate maybe on a flow chart that this is a deadline. How would you indicate that? Okay, just a couple more. Desktop. How would you communicate the idea of desktop? Next one, a little more complicated. Feedback loop. Feedback loop. Where might you start to communicate that idea? Okay, two more. This one is hidden. How might you communicate that something, maybe a password, is hidden or an image is hidden? And last one, complete. What is a visual cue you could give to your user or your stakeholder to let them know that a process is complete? Okay, that's time. So that really was a lightning round. In a perfect world, I would put you in breakout rooms at this point and let you show your drawings to each other and see what you can learn from one another. Unfortunately, we don't have time for that tonight, but I know some of you have exchanged your LinkedIn links on in the chat. So I hope you'll keep the conversation going. The last thing I wanted to leave you with tonight was the opportunity to discover some free resources that are out there so you can keep this going. This was just a very super fast overview of the beginning of how you might start to use sketching to communicate your design work. But there are so many more levels. There's an entire discipline in facilitation now called sketchnoting, where people use these kind of icons and words and visual representations to communicate a whole session or a whole seminar on a whiteboard. And it's almost like an infographic meets a graphic novel. How it looks is really extraordinary. So this idea of visual literacy is really coming up in the design world, and I hope you'll continue to explore it. Wanted to share a few resources with you. This was my favorite when I was getting started. There's a link here, and this will also be, I'll be sending Corey a PDF of all these slides so they can be shared with you. But what Christina does is, this is an email list, and what she'll do is send you 3 words every morning. And just like the exercise that we just did, and maybe there will be anchor, timeline, and settings. And you will take a couple minutes and draw out what you think would be some good icons or visual communications for that. And then the next morning, you'll get her drawings of what she came up with, and then 3 more words. And over 100 days, you'll end up with what's showing on the screen here, which is this 300 icon vocabulary that you have. And this was a huge, huge tool for me when I was getting started, and it's still active, it's free. So definitely consider checking that out if that's the kind of thing you're interested in. Next one is for inspiration, is something called the Noun Project that you may have heard of for your classes as a place to find icons, but it's also got some great collections that can inspire you. And you know, you may say medical, I'm going to sit down and study medical, or this looks like this is lungs and there's a flower coming out of them, so I'm assuming this is something about clean energy or taking care of the environment or climate change or something like that. So there's some really sophisticated ideas here that professional artists have developed icons for and are sharing them. So you can help yourself to this and copy their work or just be inspired by it and come up with your own collections. That's the nounproject.com. Next one is UX Collective on Medium is just a terrific resource in general. They have a lot of great content that they've curated from across Medium. And this particular example, this is a super short article, but UX UI Sketching Techniques 101, I think, is a 3-minute read, but he's got some great tips on things to do. Use all capital letters, use real words to draw attention if you can. This is obviously more high fidelity than what we were working on. You can use, shows where to use bits of color, right? So that's a terrific resource. If you're more into videos, some of us learn better with video, and Nielsen Norman Group has a ton of fantastic resources, but here is one that I think is pretty valuable. Sketching for Non-Designers. You can get it on YouTube. The link is here, and it's just a quick little video, but they're really friendly. They're really easy to follow and super helpful. And then this last one, it's a little something that I wrote back in the day. Here's some sketchnoting. This is an image of how you might, level up your sketching here. And this is a link to my article, but I've got a bunch of other resources in this piece that talk about if you're someone who is new to visual design. There are a lot of games that designers have created on the web that are great ways to teach yourself how big or small is a pixel, and is this a sans serif or a serif font. There's games for all this kind of stuff for designers. They're fun, they're free, and I highly recommend that you check them out. So we are over time, so I'm going to close by just a quick review of our learning goals. This is what we wanted to accomplish. This is what we hoped to accomplish an hour and a half ago. We wanted to teach you a simple visual alphabet. We wanted to help you start building your own visual library, your own components. We wanted you to practice some sketching in real time, which I hope you had the opportunity to do. We wanted you to be introduced to some of these free resources that you could access later, and hopefully feel a little more confident by the end of this very short course that you actually can communicate visually. Y'all, you drew squiggle birds at the beginning. Those were some birds that you will never forget, I promise. And this is how to get hold of me if you've got additional questions about this class, if you've got questions about sketching, if you have questions about product design of Flatiron, I'm more than happy to answer any of them. So that's my spiel. That's my commercial. There it is. Grab a screenshot. And I am going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Corey. There we go.
You're getting all of the thanks from the audience. Thank you guys for coming out tonight.
You're welcome.
We appreciate you so much. This is such a great event. There's a lot of questions about
drawings.
I know.
I'm so sad.
Something we'll workshop. We have to figure out some way to
get
to
figure out how to do it.
And if anybody has any questions, you can always, I put my email in the chat earlier. You guys can reach out to me. Julie shared her email as well. And I will be sending out the this video within about 3 business days, along with a PDF of her presentations. That way you guys have all of those resources that she shared as well. Book suggestion at the back of the napkin.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Okay.
Definitely check that out. I haven't heard that one, but that's great, because that's where so many fantastic ideas begin. It's on the back of the napkin under a beer. That's where the magic starts.
Well, thank you guys so
Sherry.
much. Have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing you again at our next event. Have a good night, guys.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Take care.